If all on Olympus would deny me my vengeance, then all on Olympus will die. I have lived in the shadow of the gods for long enough. The time of the gods has come to an end.
Hey, what is up guys, it's Major Illy here, and today we're going to be talking about the next God of War game and speculate about the possible avenues that it could take and whether it will be announced at the PlayStation Experience. So as of recording this, the PlayStation Experience, Sony's annual event dedicated to its fans, is just under 2 weeks away now. I'm extremely excited for it and I can't wait to see what they have in store for us, especially since it looks like backwards compatibility with both PS2 and PS1 games is going to be officially announced, but that is another video altogether. The God of War games will always have a special place in my heart, since they are one of the main reasons why I am so passionate about games in the first place. I still remember back in 2005 when the first one came out. I think I was about 12 or 13 years old and I went over to my cousin's house who kept telling me how great this game was called God of War. When I played the opening level where you face off against the Hydras, it absolutely blew my mind. The Blades of Chaos felt like nothing I'd ever experienced before, and the combat overall had this very tight, visceral feel to it, and the boss battles were just epic in every way. It was kind of refreshing to play as someone like Kratos, who was portrayed so well by T.C. Carson, and I still think he is a badass to this day. So after I finished the opening level, I ran to my parents to convince them to buy it for me. They said no at first because they were quite strict about me playing games that were rated for adults. So after weeks of begging and begging, they finally caved in and bought it for me, and I have been hooked ever since. The games are known for having a great balance of combat, puzzle solving elements, platforming and story, and they have a tradition of always starting off with very grand, memorable openings, and to this day, I am still yet to think of a game that has a more epic opening than God of War 3. And while God of War certainly didn't invent QTEs, it definitely popularised them, and is one of the few games that actually use them well. The God of War trilogy is definitely up there for me with the Uncharted trilogy, so you can imagine how excited I am for the next one, despite Ascension being a slight disappointment. So what do we know so far about the next God of War? We know that Cory Barlog will serve as creative director. He also directed God of War 2, which in my opinion had the best story, and while it technically hasn't been officially announced, he accidentally let it slip at the God of War retrospective panel last year at PSX that they are indeed working on a new one, so we know it's happening. Interestingly, Sony Santa Monica then posted a tweet confirming what he said and then deleted it, but they also responded to someone else saying that yes, it is true they are working on another one. While speaking to the audience at PSX last year at the God of War retrospective panel, he said that it would definitely not be a prequel, so it's looking as though it will either be a reboot or a continuation of the story from the past God of War games. If they do decide to pick up where 3 left off, it would be interesting to see where they'd go with it. I think development started in the second half of 2013, sometime after Ascension came out, since it was announced in August of that year that Barlog was coming back to the studio to put together a team to work on a new game. Hopefully by the time PSX hits they'll be ready to officially announce it and show us something. Barlog did after all say that we'd learn more about it in a year or two at last year's PSX, so there is definitely a possibility that we'll see it there this year. After God of War 3 came out, I think the studio was essentially split up into 2 teams. One worked on Ascension and the other team led by Stig Asmussen, the director of God of War 3, worked on this open world third-person science fiction game which was apparently quite similar to Destiny. But it was announced that the latter project was canned and a series of very unfortunate layoffs hit the studio. Asmussen himself went to Respawn Entertainment, the studio that gave us Titanfall, to work on something else. The team who did Ascension probably moved on to the next God of War after it came out, and those who stayed at the studio after the other project was cancelled must have moved on to God of War 4. So it's pretty safe to say that the whole studio right now is probably all hands on deck for the next God of War. Some of you might be thinking, why don't Sony Santa Monica just move on and make a new IP, since Kratos' story is essentially finished? But it makes a lot of sense to carry on making God of War games, since God of War is undoubtedly one of Sony's biggest IPs. God of War 3 was the second best-selling first-party exclusive last gen, bested only by Gran Turismo, and it's fair to say that Kratos is certainly one of PlayStation's most famous icons, up there with characters like Nathan Drake and Ratchet & Clank. So let's start examining the hints that we've been given as to what this next God of War might possibly be. The first one that comes to mind was the moving painting that's uncovered once you solve a puzzle in Chapter 14 of God of War Ascension. It said something about a journey beginning when the Earth stops. This could be a reference to the journey that will take place in God of War 4 after Kratos effectively disrupted the balance of nature on Earth by killing all of the Greek gods in God of War 3. Furthermore, we don't even know if Kratos really died at the end of God of War 3, since Kratos' body disappeared with nothing but a trail of blood going towards the sea. There was also a phoenix on the floor where his body was, which symbolises regeneration. The fact that Sony went to the trouble of remastering God of War 3 for the PS4 might also hint that God of War 4 might, at least to a certain extent, tie into the events of what happened in that game. The way I see it, the next one can go one of three main ways. The first way kind of ties into what David Jaffe, the original creator of God of War, said to Jeff Keighley in an interview back at Comic-Con in 2010. He said that his idea involved a portal opening up after Kratos kills Zeus, which lets in all of the gods from the different mythologies, so Norse, Egyptian, etc. This would make sense as Kratos' actions in God of War 3 would surely piss off all the other gods from the different regions of the world who now see him as a threat and come to kill him. Kratos would end up killing them all by playing them against each other, and it would ultimately explain why people don't believe in any of those gods from those mythologies anymore. The God of War games are primarily set in Greece after all, so the fact that there are all these other gods ruling other parts of the world could make sense. Kratos then sets off on a globe-trotting adventure to make amends for his actions while he fights all these other gods like Osiris and Anubis from Egypt, and Odin and Thor from Scandinavia. This would make for some varied environments and great bosses. It would also lead to some interesting combinations, as David Jaffe had the idea of Kratos using a Gorgon head to turn a sphinx into stone so that it becomes the famous Sphinx statue in Egypt. The second main idea involves setting the next game in an alternate reality that focuses on a Norse or an Egyptian version of Kratos, so you'd have the same voice actor and everything. Alternatively, it could involve Kratos being reborn or reincarnated in say Egypt or Norway after his death in God of War 3, so you'd have an Egyptian or Norse version of him that way. This would certainly fit in with the phoenix symbol I mentioned earlier that was found on the floor of where Kratos' body was. I'd personally love to see it in ancient Egypt. I mean, come on, not only would it pave the way for some great stories, but imagine the next gen sound effects that we'd be seeing. It does look like it's likely that they'll choose this pantheon since there was an in-game reference to Egypt in Ascension involving a note from someone saying that they come from the land of the pharaoh. Then again, Thor's hammer Mjolnir was available to use in Ascension's multiplayer, possibly indicating that the Norse gods are out there somewhere in that universe. The third way I can see them taking would be to just reboot the series entirely, where we follow a completely new character in Egyptian or Norse mythology. It could be the God of War from the respective mythology they choose that we play as, or an original character like Kratos was. This would certainly be the hardest route to take, since having a new protagonist might mean having to come up with a new weapon as good as the Blades of Chaos, which have always been the bread and butter of this series. It would be a very interesting challenge for the team, and I'd love to see what they come up with if they decide to leave the Blades of Chaos behind. One mustn't also forget that Kratos is a famous face for PlayStation, so it could be a potentially risky move since they'd have to come up with a new protagonist as badass as he is to take up the mantle. There are those, however, who are sick of him and would welcome a completely new protagonist. No matter what they do though, they have to have Guy's voice actor return to narrate the story. We'll hopefully get to see at least a teaser at PSX of what direction Santa Monica are taking, if not a gameplay demo. It'll be funny to go back and watch this video after we finally know what it's going to be about. If we do get a gameplay demo, I have no doubt it will look incredible, as they are known for always pushing the limits of the current hardware, since God of War 3 and Ascension still look amazing to this day. It will no doubt be a fantastic showcase of what the PS4 is capable of. Please let me know in the comments below what you'd like to see from a new God of War game, as I'd love to hear your ideas. Would you like to see Kratos come back, and if not, why? I personally don't mind, although I do think the last two ideas would present more interesting character avenues to explore, since we've already had 6 games with him if you count the games made by Ready at Dawn. Based on what we know so far, factoring in the fact that God of War games typically come out in March, I'm going to make a bold prediction now that it won't release until around March 2017. As always guys, if you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe for plenty more God of War and PSX coverage in the future. Thanks for watching.